On the Talkback Show on the radio or whatever audiovisual device you choose to use. Welcome to the GBC podcast, where we talk about the Packers and our hometown of Green Bay. This is episode 5, created February 2nd, 2022. I'm John. I'm in Appleton, Wisconsin. Along with me are Jeff in Minnesota and Neil on the East Coast. Say hello, gentlemen, and tell us what you're drinking.
Hello, gentlemen. Tonight is a AleSmith Speedway Stout. Good and good for you.
Hi, this is Neil, and tonight's beverage is from Green Bay. It is a Copper State Platinum Blonde Coffee Stout Nitro, and despite being a coffee stout, it is very blonde.
And I still had that sour mix that I needed to kill, so I am on an Amaretto Sour this evening. All right, you can find us on YouTube and Twitter at Green Bay Chat and Facebook at the GBC Podcast Green Bay Chat. Our topics this time around, we're going to look at Championship Sunday, wrap that up, and get a look at the picks that we made. We're going to talk about where we might still be in those stages of grief. We've got some Packer coaching moves, as well as our Packers of the past, looking at the Pro Bowl coming up with the Packers staff on board there. And we'll, as always, have a Packer history lesson to wrap things up with. So taking a look at this past weekend, 2 big games that were on the docket, you guys. The early matchup in the AFC Championship Game, a stunner with the Bengals upending the Chiefs 27-24. All 3 of us picked that one wrong. We went with the home team, the Chiefs, who were favored by 7 in that one. And then in the afternoon matchup, the NFC Championship Game, where the Rams hold on to win 20-17 over the 49ers. Now, we picked the Rams. We picked straight up. The Rams were favored by 3.5 on that one. So if we were really on the betting line on those numbers, we would have really stunk up the show. Based on our week prior, maybe we should tell people to start picking the opposite of what we go with when we make our picks. Let's start with that AFC Championship Game, though, Neil. Bengals Chiefs. What did you like about that game? What didn't you like?
It was the tale of 2 halves. I've never seen a more truly Jekyll and Hyde football game. In the first half, we texted one another, and it was, you asked if there was anything that the officials would do, or there were a number of controversial calls, and I said there was nothing that the officials or Cincinnati could do that would cause Kansas City to lose that game. I was so confident. In fact, I liked the fact that they went for it on the at the end of the half, and because they had a play that actually was well set up to score the touchdown, and Mahomes threw it a little bit off, and that's foreshadowing right there. The second half, Patrick Mahomes played like playoff Aaron Rodgers, at least playoff losses Aaron Rodgers. And that is shocking, absolutely shocking to see Mahomes play like that. I mean, in overtime, I think it was the most ridiculous part, right? Before he threw his actual interception, he had to throw, should have been an interception. I mean, it was absolute garbage play from Patrick Mahomes for much of the second half. And, there's certainly enough to be said about Andy Reid, and Andy Reid learned coaching from Mike Holmgren. And, we love Mike Holmgren, but we certainly had concerns about him going conservative in the second half with the lead. And Andy Reid absolutely did that in the championship game, and it cost him.
I texted at one point towards the end of the second half, and I said, is Kansas City going to punt this game? Because, they had 4 possessions and looked like they were going to score, 4 perhaps touchdowns, but it really seemed to turn, sometimes these things, I don't know if it was overconfidence, but when they did not score at the end and they pissed that away, it was kind of like one of those, was it a karma thing, or was it, just like, okay, did they get a little too cute? And so did Mahomes and we just, 3 points, we don't need it. We're so dominant here. We don't have to worry about throwing away those points, because they at least should have gotten 3 points there. At least. It's like very inexcusable. So when that happened, it was like, well, that was weird. And it's like, so is that going to come back and bite him in the ass? And the answer obviously is yes.
I had read that with the 5 seconds on the clock that Mahomes wanted another play. Reid was ready to send out the field goal unit, and Mahomes wanted that other play, and Reid gave him the play. And
sure did.
You're right. It just did not, he should have thrown it into the ground or thrown it away or something to try to preserve a second or 2 on the clock. And it just was a really weird sway of momentum. But I kind of felt the same way, like what you said there. You have a 21-3 lead, and you have been just utterly dominating.
Yep.
And if you can score that touchdown and go 28-3, you really are cementing the deal.
But even if you score the field goal, it's
still, the field goal at 24-3 gives you that solid 3 possession footing. But even though they didn't score, I didn't feel like it was the beginning of a collapse. Now, I'm sure that the Bengals had a great locker room, and
Yeah.
I'm sure the Chiefs were the mindset, hey, it's okay. We're getting the ball. We're gonna just stick with our game plan. But something
what a
happened there.
change. Yeah. Just
Something happened there that not only fired up the Bengals, but deflated the Chiefs.
but the
And they
Chiefs were at
never-
home too.
and they
That's the
never
other.
were-
It's not like they're on the road.
Yeah, and they weren't completely out of it, but they just never got back into it.
They were just
And-
sleepwalking through it.
And Cincinnati, to their credit, did not give up
No.
and just kind of nickeled and dimed their way back into it. And you look at it from the perspective of Chiefs were up 21-3 in the first half, and the Bengals outscored the Chiefs 21-3 in the second half.
Yep.
And just, kind of one of those incredible comebacks, one of those games that'll probably be talked about for a long time on Cincinnati getting back to the Super Bowl.
Well, the other nice thing too is that it didn't have that overtime because you saw all the reactions, right? Burrow's body language when they lost the toss was like, he wasn't happy, and Mahomes is like, sweet, so that was kind of that, I don't know, reverse karma then too, because what we had seen, the prior week, where it's, overtime, boom, they go down, they score, game over. And, like when Mahomes came out, just stunk the place, even in the overtime, it was just like, okay. So when he threw that pick, it was like, at that point, I was like, well, Cincinnati's going to win. I mean, I was just thinking to myself, because I'm like, there's no way that they're going to be denied at this point because they've got the ball. So suddenly this whole dynamic has changed. And to say, fuck this overtime, we're done. We are going to put them out of their misery and put this to bed. And they did. And wow, amazing.
I think the thing that struck me though about Mahomes is, as I said, I think he got the Rodgers rate at halftime pep talk from Aaron, but he this season was not a great season for him overall. There's a reason why he's not in the MVP discussion. You go to our game against Kansas City, and if Mahomes was played a reasonable Mahomes game, they would have absolutely destroyed us. And going against Jordan Love, and they didn't. And the first half of the season he didn't play particularly well, at least by his standards. And specifically on that last play, that last play of the first half, I mean, I've looked at it. I've looked at analysis of this. If he throws that pass correctly, it's a touchdown. He threw it low. He made the receiver come back. It's not a touchdown, and they don't get any points out of it. And I wonder whether we're going to hear something about Mahomes having some nagging injury that he had been dealing with all year. And, is that part of the reason behind what happened? Because he was not Mahomes sharp, and he's young enough that you don't think that this is anything like a regression in his physical abilities. It's got to be something else. I don't see a good reason why he would have played like this in so many games this year.
I saw an interesting, so Mahomes, of the really young, good AFC quarterbacks, Mahomes is kind of older, if you will, or, more experienced. So it's going to be a matter of, okay, did Mahomes, now being in 4 straight AFC Championship games, is his window like closed? I mean, I don't know. I mean, we'll see. But I mean, with the, obviously with Burrow, but I mean, you've got a lot of really, really good young quarterbacks in the AFC.
Yeah.
Is Mahomes?
Right. You've got Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, for the next 8 to 10 years,
right?
That are gonna be running the AFC.
Yeah, but look at the Chargers.
And Justin Herbert. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's oh, by the way, if oh my God, Lamar Jackson's not hurt, right? I mean, seriously. So I mean, is Mahomes's window closing maybe a little bit? I don't know.
I still think he's the best quarterback among that group, at least right now. So,
okay.
But yeah, Allen and Herbert will want to enter that discussion coming up soon.
Yes.
All right, let's take a look at the NFC matchup then that afternoon, the 49ers and the Rams. And we did pick the Rams to win that one. And we kind of knew we didn't want San Francisco to advance on that. But there was one point where I really wanted Bengals 49ers part 3 in the Super Bowl. I think that because you got was it Super Bowl 16 and 23, I think, and then it would have been nice having 56 to be a rematch of them. Would have been interesting because Jeff, you mentioned last time around that the Bengals have never lost in an AFC Championship
and they
game.
they're
Still
their,
have it.
yep.
And how interesting would it have been if they would have had to have faced the 49ers in the third Super Bowl, and then how the statistical analysis of history with that one. But
big difference, big difference facing Jimmy Garoppolo versus facing Joe Montana.
Joe Montana, yep,
right.
A little bit. Yep.
Yes. Yeah. There's no Montana and Rice for sure on this 49ers squad. But the Rams hold on. They win 20-17 in a home game, and they get to be the home team for the Super Bowl as well.
However, the home away team,
right? The Bengals are the designated home team because it's the AFC's turn this year. So fortunately, somebody stepped in with some practical wisdom and said the Rams can have their home locker room. So I'm not sure. I would assume the Bengals are going to go into the Chargers locker room as opposed to the dumpy visiting locker room.
Yeah, dumpy in what, a $2 billion brand new stadium. I'm sure
right.
it's really a shitty
$4 billion or $5 billion.
Oh, whatever.
Right.
What's a couple billion among friends?
But Rams
49ers.
It's
Stan Kroenke, and I'm an Arsenal fan, so I'm a little bit sensitive to this.
Oh yes, that's right. Yeah, he's yes.
But did the Rams, was this their game to lose, Neil? Did they have this one all the way through, or did you think there was a point where San Francisco was going to pull this out?
It was certainly an entertaining enough game, and fundamentally what I learned from that game is Matthew Stafford is not the Detroit Matthew Stafford. We talked about that in the preview to an extent, but Matthew Stafford once again showed me that he's got way more in him than he showed in Detroit. And maybe just took him a while to wash that Detroit stench off of him. Obviously having somebody like Cooper Kupp, having their incredible defense makes a difference, but Cooper Kupp is the player, and it's going to be very interesting to watch him play in a Super Bowl. And I'll remind you that when we played the Rams last year in the playoffs, Kupp was injured, Kupp was out. And so he's been missing for a couple of their big games, and not this year, obviously. And this is something that I really would like to see him absolutely shine and star in the Super Bowl. I think that, well, we'll make picks on the Super Bowl next week, but to me, Kupp is the determining factor of the game.
So, but the only thing I was, pulling out was my hair in watching the Rams defense give up touchdowns to the San Francisco 49ers offense. And I'm like, oh my God. So we hold them to no offensive touchdowns, and the vaunted Ram defense gives up touchdowns to this group. And I was just, that's what I was, like I said, pulling on my hair. I couldn't freaking believe that they were seriously.
But to their credit, the Rams actually scored touchdowns after the first quarter too.
Well, there's that, but again, for defense, offense, you've got all the marquee players on defense, and yet Packers, granted it was a little colder, again, that cold factor, who knows? But, I think the better team won, certainly. I mean, they got the Rams got the 49ers off their back a little bit because they had lost to them, twice in the regular season. It was ugly. So one to kind of segue into the Super Bowl here. So I saw a couple stats that really I thought were interesting. So this year there were seedings 1 through 7. So first time since 1990 that none of the top 3 seeds from either division made the Super Bowl. One other interesting statistic here is that both the Packers and the San Francisco 49ers this year beat the Rams and the Bengals.
Interesting. Well, we'll go into a heavy analysis of the Super Bowl between the Rams and the Bengals next week. We'll talk about a lot of that, but really this kind of brings us to reviewing the Kubler-Ross, the cycle of grief that we talked about last time, and Neil, looking at how the Rams played this game and imagining the Rams playing the same or similar game in a 20-degree Sunday night at Lambeau Field. against the Packers. Where does that put you now in the stage of grief of, boy, this should have been the NFC Championship game in Green Bay?
It should have been the NFC Championship game, and on top of it, we've already beaten the Bengals this year, and so I relish playing Matt Stafford as a Packers fan because of all the happy memories. And sorry, the Bengals are still a young team, and a young team can get rattled. So I am still in the depression stage. And as we talked about last week, I decided to punch myself in the nuts a few more times this week and started to look back at some other things of the game. And so we talked about Rodgers in the fourth quarter of the game against San Francisco, and it's actually even worse than I looked at it first. So he was 4 of 7, 17 yards for 2 sacks. Those 2 sacks were for negative 18 yards. So we actually had negative net passing yards in the fourth quarter of the game against San Francisco. Negative net passing yards in the fourth quarter. Rodgers, as we said, had 5 sacks. He 3 times was sacked on a 3rd and 8 for -6, -8, and -11. And I don't even know what to do. I mean, we'll talk probably in the future about our opinions on Rodgers, but just the recurring nature of all of this is it just keeps dragging on me because he is not he's not a standard Matt Stafford quarterback. He's not a quarterback who chokes. He's a quarterback who leads consistently, leads comebacks. And yet, the games that he's lost in the playoffs have been so far below his standards. We talked about
epically bad. And the game against the Buccaneers last year, again, 5 sacks in that game, 3 of 7 for 49 yards in the 4th down. In the NFC Championship game in 2019, we had 5 drives in the first half that resulted in a 3rd and 7 sack for -13, a 3rd and 6 sack for -10, an aborted snap fumble with the ball lost, an interception, and a 3-and-out punt. That was the majority of our first half against San Francisco in the 2019 NFC Championship game. And you go back to all of his different games and that he's lost. And obviously he's had some really good playoff games, even since the Super Bowl. But if you exclude the garbage time in the San Francisco, the Colin Kaepernick 45-24 game, if you exclude garbage time in the Atlanta NFC Championship game after it was 31-0, exclude garbage time in that 2019 championship game when we're down 34-7 with 4:47 left in the third quarter, Rodgers averages in losses since the Super Bowl in non-garbage time. He's averaging 21 for 33 for 210 yards, 1.2 interceptions, 0.9 interceptions, 2.7 sacks per game. As many interceptions as I'm just befuddled. I keep looking at this and I don't even know how this correlates with none of it correlates with how Rodgers plays in any normal situation. And but yet this is what his post Super Bowl legacy is. And you've just punched yourself in the nuts. Oh my, I mean, you must be just, wow. Talk about a glutton for punishment. Jesus, Neil.
I've sort of, after last year, I decided to put a spreadsheet together because it just was driving me crazy. And I decided just added to it this year. And, even if you take the game this year against San Francisco, right? Rodgers 20 of 29, 225. Sounds good. You exclude that 75-yard pass to Aaron Jones, in which Rodgers then screwed up the very next play, right? 19 of 28 for 150 is not anywhere near as impressive as 20 of 29 for 225.
Spreadsheet of futility.
For the vast majority of the game, he wasn't there. And I still am going to say that I want him back because he gives us the best chance to win. He gives us, we still could run into somebody in the playoffs that we can beat. I still have confidence that he can beat teams in the playoffs. That's not what the general track record is. Neil, I'm still at depression.
Well, I was going to say, Neil, I feel a lot of anger, but I also see a lot of bargaining going on there with all of that information.
Thank you, Doctor.
And I definitely feel that from you as well. The other thing to remember, Neil, is the transitive theory of mathematics definitely applies to sports. So there's no doubt that since Green Bay beat Cincinnati once already this year, Green Bay would have beaten Cincinnati again coming up next Sunday. Right, Jeff?
Absolutely.
Well, as we're talking about the Super Bowl, it is near the end of the season, but the offseason certainly means coaching changes, and we are getting our share of that in Green Bay. We have seen Nathaniel Hackett, our offensive coordinator, get hired as the Denver Broncos head coach. Great news for him, as the Denver Broncos are kind of becoming Green Bay West. They also take Justin Outen, our tight ends coach, and make him their offensive coordinator. And we'll get into later on speculation on what players might end up moving to Denver somewhere down the road. Luke Getsy gets hired down in Chicago. He gets to be an offensive coordinator and call the plays because Chicago hired a defensive-minded head coach, and Mr. Eberfloss out of Indianapolis. So we lose those three really good coaches, but we have a strong staff underneath, Jeff, to kind of fill back in. Who's working their way back up in the ranks?
That's right. So all of the following folks that I'm going to mention here, these are all internal promotions. So Adam Stenovich becomes the offensive coordinator, and he was the O-line coach. And in 2021, he was also the run game coordinator. So Matt LaFleur tapped him to be the offensive coordinator. A couple notes about him. He is from Marshfield. So he's the second Wisconsinite to be an offensive coordinator for the Packers. And as a player, he actually was signed to the Packers practice squad in 2006. Never played, obviously, but was signed. So he was very successful as an offensive line coach. And so the Packers, here's a little factoid for you. The Packers were the first NFL team in history, NFL history, to have 13 or fewer giveaways in 3 straight seasons. That would have been 2019, 2020, and 2021. So each of those years, no more than 13. That's never been done before. Other promotions internally, Jason Vrabel was promoted to the wide receivers passing game coordinator. And a guy by the name of Luke Butkus, yes, he is the nephew of Dick Butkus. He is now the offensive line coach. Then we have Connor Lewis, who is the assistant QB coach. And Ryan Mahaffey is now the assistant O-line coach. And both Luke Butkus and Adam Stenovich are noted also as being very successful college players. And if there's a buffet in Green Bay, they will probably be going to it. Both these gentlemen, they're not built like Matt LaFleur. Let's put it that way.
Certainly some big moves coming in for Green Bay. And then, like I said, we'll keep an eye on what happens over in Denver. But when we talk about the coaching ranks, Neil, it brings us to our Packers of the past. And the big thing about our Packers of the past is our connection that we really have, Green Bay has, with the Cincinnati Bengals. And who's that guy that you got posted for us today, Neil?
We've got Forrest Gregg as this week's Packers player of the past. And obviously everyone who's a Packers fan knows of Forrest Gregg as being the anchor on the line in Vince Lombardi. And it's remarkable looking back at what he accomplished and what he went through. And you know, he was all pro, first team for 7 years, second team for 2 years, Pro Bowl another year beyond those things. So from 1959 to 1968, he was either all pro or Pro Bowl in all of those years. Obviously, all decade team, one of the greatest of all time. If you go to Lambeau Field, you'll notice in the Ring of Honor, the Green Bay Packers Ring of Honor indicates the years that the players who were in the NFL Hall of Fame played for the Packers. And so Forrest Gregg played in 56 and then from 1958 to 1970. What happened to Forrest Gregg in 1957? He was drafted into the Army and he served at Fort Carson. He missed the last game of the 56 season. He missed the 57 season. The Army at that time had football. He was all Armed Forces All-Star team during his 1 year in the Armed Forces in 1957. 1958, obviously, and 1957, obviously a momentous year for the Packers in a lot of ways that we'll get to in history. 58, the last year before Vince Lombardi, and then obviously as an anchor for the Lombardi teams. A couple of other things about Forrest Gregg as a player that I find remarkable. He was 6'4", but he was actually only 250 pounds. Not known as the largest of linemen, but known for his speed and for his intelligence as a player. He set a record for Ironman among NFL players, playing in 188 consecutive games as a lineman. A couple other things about Forrest Gregg that I was not familiar with. And so we know him as the big right tackle that on the Lombardi lines, but he was kind of the Elton Jenkins of the 1960s in that in 56, he played at right guard. In 58, he played at left tackle. In 59, he played at right tackle as he played for most of his time. But in 61 and 64, he was also playing at right guard. And specifically in the 1964, he was first team All-Pro as a right guard rather than right tackle for all of his other years. The other thing about Forrest Gregg as a player is he was the Brett Favre of the 1960s, and that he announced his retirement in 64, 69, 70, and 71 until Dan Devine eventually cut him in 1971, but then went to the Dallas Cowboys and won a Super Bowl with the Dallas Cowboys. And until last year, he held the NFL record for most NFL champions at 6, 5 with the Packers, 1 with the Dallas Cowboys. Obviously, Forrest Gregg was before all of our time, but what we think of as Forrest Gregg as Packers fans of our vintage is Forrest Gregg being the savior for the Packers. At least that's what we thought after the Bart Starr era as coach from 75 to 83. Forrest Gregg had been coach in Kansas City. He took Kansas City to the Super Bowl in 1981.
Cincinnati.
There we go. And so he had been successful in Cincinnati. He had been successful in Cincinnati. And had a really good team. In that 1981 season, they were 12-4. They had a young Chris Collinsworth in his first year. They had Anthony Munoz, obviously one of the greatest tackles of all time. They had Ken Anderson in his most efficient year, where he won an NFL MVP in that season. That 1981 Cincinnati season also included one of the second coldest game in NFL history in the AFC Championship, the Freezer Bowl, which was -9 degrees at Riverfront Stadium with wind chills of -59. One other element of Forrest Gregg, though, as a coach in Cincinnati, that 1981 team actually had a number of future NFL head coaches, including Bruce Coslet, future Jets coach, Dick LeBeau, obviously longtime defensive coordinator for Pittsburgh, and also one Lindy Infante, who was the quarterback coach, wide receivers coach, and the offensive coordinator in those 1981 Cincinnati Bengals. I don't know why I want to put them in Kansas City, but I still obviously think that that was the team that should have won, though I'm very happy that Cincinnati is the team that did win. And so Forrest Gregg is when Bart Starr left the Packers after the 83 season, we thought, wow, this was a guy who just came because of his Packers glory, didn't have the experience in coaching. Forrest Gregg comes and you see him, okay, well, this is a guy who's taken a team to a Super Bowl. I know that for me, and I'm sure for you as well, we thought, okay, well, we've now actually got somebody who's going to be a competent coach. And we assumed that the Packers under Forrest Gregg were now going to become the force that we had always hoped that they were going to be. That didn't happen. And Jeff, you want to go through exactly how that didn't happen?
So Bart Starr, by all accounts, was a class act. And so when Forrest Gregg came in, his demeanor was very, very different than Bart Starr's. Forrest Gregg, Bart Starr was a quarterback. Forrest Gregg, was an Iron Man. He was an offensive lineman, different mentality and different temperament. So Forrest Gregg was introduced as the Packers head coach on Christmas Eve, 1983. At the time, he was 50 years old. He had coached not only in Cincinnati, but he also had coached with the Cleveland Browns from 1975 to 1977. And his record there, it was a losing record, but he was 18-23 in Cleveland. Goes over to Cincinnati. His record there was 32-25. So coming into Green Bay, he was 50-48. So according to what I've read, Forrest Gregg comes in and immediately, in a very heavy-handed way, doesn't get really an opportunity to clean house because of the structure that was in Green Bay. And there were some decent, not franchise, absolute extraordinary players in Green Bay, but he didn't have an opportunity to clean house. That created a ton of friction. So he kind of inherits a team that's not very good. He can't really do that much about it. So he was mired in mediocrity, but as I'm not here for character assassination. I wasn't there. At the time I was 15 years old, so I don't know personally. But some players really liked him because he was a disciplinarian. Other players, not so much. But there's one thing that was for sure during his tenure in Green Bay is that the level of what some would call dirty play, especially with the Chicago Bears, really got out of control. The Charles Martin, picking up Jim McMahon and slamming him down well after the play. There's all kind, just the 80s Packers Bears games. I mean, the Bears were very dominant because the Packers were awful, but the Packers were and none too happy about it and were willing to basically be cheap shots right off the bat. And just really anything goes. Now, there was a part also because Forrest Gregg, when he was introduced, and this was kind of throughout the 70s and 80s until Ron Wolf came in 1991, the management structure was a little funky. And what I mean by that is that the coaches were kind of general managers, but kind of not. And so there was a lot of, during the drafts, there wasn't a clear cut who was in charge. So in other words, the coaches, Bart Starr, and this was true for Bart Starr, Forrest Gregg, and Lindy Infante, they did have a lot of say. Rather than listening to the scouts, they often listened to the position players, oftentimes to their detriment. So perfect example. So in the 1984 draft, so Forrest Gregg's first draft, Packers defense wasn't stellar. So he was looking for a defender. But there was a guy by the name of Boomer Esiason that was the top-rated quarterback on the Packer draft board in 1984. Packers had the 12th overall pick, and Forrest Gregg's like, no way, I'm not picking a quarterback, even though they desperately needed one. I'm not picking a quarterback. I need somebody on defense. So, having Forrest Gregg coming from Cincinnati and then having the 12th overall pick, Boomer Esiason is the top-rated quarterback. Forrest Gregg says, no way, and make a different pick. So instead, a guy by the name of Boomer Esiason does get drafted. He got drafted in the second round, 38th overall, to the Cincinnati Bengals. So, and then the rest kind of there is history, whereas Boomer played 14 years, made 4 Pro Bowls, and led Cincy back to the Super Bowl, again, where they faced Cincinnati, where they faced San Francisco. But it was kind of a weird, between the two teams with Forrest Gregg and then Boomer Esiason. But yeah, by the time Forrest Gregg left, he actually had 1 year left on his contract. He resigned. Basically, he was told by Packers management that, okay, you've got 1 year left. We have to do better. He resigned, didn't tell any of his staff, and flew down to Dallas on January 13th of 1988, and where he was introduced as coach of SMU, told none of his assistant coaches, just resigned and took off, and that was that. That was the end of the Forrest Gregg era in Green Bay.
So one thing about the Forrest Gregg going to SMU, so that was his alma mater, and they were just back from the death penalty at that time. And so he was basically saying, I need, this. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, right, they had accumulated so many violations of NCAA policy that their NCAA football was suspended for a year. All of their scholarships were eliminated. Yep. And so they had nothing. They had a team of freshmen, and he actually had the team not play for a second year because they lost all of their scholarship athletes who transferred. Interestingly, for me at least, their first game back was against Rice University, who at that point had an 18-game losing streak, the longest in college football. And me as a Rice sophomore was terrified that was going to continue against the back from the death penalty. Thankfully, it didn't happen. I think the Forrest Gregg era was obviously something that we came in with a lot of hope. And his first 2 years, they were 8-8, and obviously the last 2 weren't so good. I think one of the things that to me is most striking in looking back at the statistics on the Forrest Gregg era is that we stunk at running the football. We absolutely stunk at running the football. That 1984 team, which started out 1-7 and then went to 8-8, so giving you hope for the 1985 team. James Lofton had 62 receptions for 1,361 yards. Our top rusher had 581 yards. Forrest Gregg's second year, our top rusher had 636 yards. Forrest Gregg's third year, our top rusher had 519 yards. Forrest Gregg's fourth year, our top rusher had 413 yards. So you think of Forrest Gregg and line play, and this was certainly not a hallmark of those 80s Forrest Gregg teams.
And those are 16 game seasons too at that point. So 400 and some odd yards over 16 games.
Yeah, I mean, there was a
That's
running back
awful.
by committee part where you had a couple of people that were in those things, but yeah, it's just we couldn't run the football for a team that was coached by one of the greatest blockers of all time.
Yeah. Overall record in Green Bay was 25, 37, and 1.
With a worse winning percentage than Bart Starr.
If you guys remember in Allouez, when the Broadview YMCA opened up, the Allouez pool became the Broadview YMCA.
Yep.
Johnny Gray actually worked at the YMCA. He was director there, headed up the lifestyle center, exercise center, things like that. And John Dorsey, who was playing for the Packers at the time, was a regular at the YMCA, and he would play basketball in pickup games with us. And I can remember one Saturday being there for some pickup games when it's usually pretty quiet. And John Dorsey brought Charles Martin, Kenneth Davis, and Kenny Stills, and a few other guys with him to play basketball. And I had the pleasure of getting to post up against Charles Martin underneath the basket, and I still have some trauma about that game.
Bruises, probably.
At least your head and shoulder intact.
Yes. But it was interesting to I'm just hanging out at the YMCA on a Saturday, and it's like, that's a large man. He wants to play basketball. And everybody knew Dorsey at the time. It was like, and then kind of putting the pieces together, and they're all introducing themselves like, yeah, you are. Yeah, you are. Okay. And I mean, of all the pickup basketball that I played at the YMCA, that is one game in 1986 that I can tell you I remember a lot of details about. But yeah, those guys had their reputation that preceded them, and they were big, scary men. But I think that Forrest Gregg, I mean, that's what he was trying to do. Dan Campbell in Detroit wanted to eat kneecaps this year, or whatever the hell it was that he said that they were going to do. That's certainly the attitude that I think Forrest Gregg was trying to instill with his defense. You talk about that, Jeff, in that draft, very defensive minded, because in that draft with Carricker, he also took Donnie Humphrey and John Dorsey in that same draft in 1984. So there's no doubt that he was trying to put some bite in that defense to really shake things up, because that was the downfall to the Lynn Dickey teams of 82, 83. That should have been better, but didn't have a defense to help them out. But then we get into the Lindy Infante years, and we don't even want to talk about that. That 89 draft, we were talking about that previously, but the 89 draft was even scarier.
It was
four Hall of Famers in the first 5 picks, and we get Tony Manford, right?
With the second overall pick. Yeah, not so much.
A tale for another day as we get into the draft.
And Lindy Infante managing to both outdo Bart Starr and Forrest Gregg with a winning percentage going all the way down to a 375 winning percentage.
Yeah, just 24 and 40. Not so good.
Appalling.
And considering the 10-6 season in 1989.
Right, exactly.
10-6 out of there.
Well, his last, when he was done, they were 4-12 his last season. So, but just one quick note, and I'll put this out there for, again, the future. The one thing that did positively happen during the Lindy Infante era was on June 5th, 1989, after Lindy Infante had been hired, was hired in early 88, in February, Bob Harlan was elected president of the Packers, June 5th, 1989, which set things in motion so that when he fired Tom Bratz on November 20th of 1991, 7 days later, a guy by the name of Ron Wolf was hired, and Bob Harlan, I would argue, almost single-handedly rescued the franchise at that point.
And that is certainly an important date, because you go prior to that. Why do we reset? First of all, how does Bart Starr become a coach with no coaching experience? Why do we recycle Forrest Gregg, and how do we get lucky enough to get Lindy Infante in? and you've got that executive committee that was running things in Green Bay, and these were all great people for Green Bay. Not going to take
Absolutely.
away anything from any of them as business people, as people dedicated to the team or anything like that. But as the field of professional football grew in the 1980s, these were not professional football people. And like you said, Jeff, they weren't necessarily listening to the scouts. The scouting was different in the 80s and was evolving as well.
Mhm.
And it was that lack of football knowledge that led to Bob Harlan coming in and saying, let's let one guy run this.
Well,
Instead of
Bob
having a
Harlan
group
had
of
been
7 or 8.
there. He saw the good and the bad and the ugly. Now, the other kind of saving grace during this time for Green Bay is that in the early 80s, at least, and especially under Bart Starr, the Packer actual players were some of the highest paid in the league, which was interesting. So that when Greg comes in and, as the 80s go, they're like, we can't keep playing. So they got cheap. They got really cheap. So that, again, through the 80s, so the Packers, they saved money by not paying the players, so that, again, kind of when Bob Harlan, because he did a lot of the negotiating, and then when brings on Ron Wolf and then Mike Holmgren, they actually have savings, because obviously we all know that there's no billionaire owner to foot the bills here. So that was it was a little bit of a silver lining, through a really terrible era, because they were cheap. They had funds to then start paying in the early 90s. And that's one of the reasons why they had the funds to pay a guy by the name of Reggie White.
The other thing with the coaching staff, the Packer coaching staff actually gets to coach in the Pro Bowl. Yay, big consolation prize. The Packers coaching staff and the Titans staff coaching this weekend in the Pro Bowl. Interesting question, though, as Jeff listed off all of those promotions, who's going to be taking what roles? We'll find out on Sunday, because quite frankly, we don't care about the Pro Bowl anyway. But it is time to wrap things up with a bedtime story and Packer history. Jeff has a story for us. And talking about that New City Stadium, Jeff, the only thing that I want to say is it was fortuitous, really, that they built New City Stadium right there on Lombardi Avenue 3 years before Coach Lombardi was hired. How did that happen?
Well, July 26, 1957, the New City Stadium was officially christened. It was not Lombardi Avenue at that point, obviously. So there was big dedication. It was a big deal. But really what the new stadium did for the city of Green Bay is it ushered in a new era. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. There was a lot of consternation. There was a lot of infighting. There was a lot of things that almost didn't go right to get that stadium built. At the time, it was built in a place called Ashwaubenon. It was outside of this Green Bay city limits. It was also west of Broadway Avenue. So you couldn't drink in the city of Green Bay west of Broadway Avenue back in the day. So there was a big dedication day. It was a big deal. The topography, everything kind of worked in there in the favor of the city of Green Bay and of the Packers. They were able to, where the initial plan was to build fixed seats, but then some like removable, almost like high school bleachers. They were actually able to build 32,000 set seats. And this kind of jump started the team, because a lot of NFL franchises at that time did not have new stadiums. They were in other kind of hybrid stadiums. They weren't afforded an opportunity just for their own stadium. So there was brand new shiny stadium, literally in a farm field, and it was an anomaly. But it was good for the city of Green Bay. So the first game that was played in New City Stadium, again, they were christened Green Bay City Stadium. It was a 21-17 victory over Chicago on September 29th of 1957. That was a huge deal. Now, back in 1957, if you were a resident of the great city of Green Bay or in Wisconsin in general, you could pick up some season tickets. They were playing 3 home games. It was $2.25 a game for students. Or you could pick up a season pass of 3 games for either $6.75, $9.90, or the really good 50-yard line seats for 3 games for $14.25.
And I'm sure
Quick
people are
note-
complaining about the 25 cents on all of those.
Exactly. So again, it was called Green Bay City Stadium for a number of years, and then there was when it was actually became Lambeau Field, that was another kind of big controversy. That's a story for another time. But there's some changes potentially, John. You get some unpopular rumors potentially, or tell us a little bit about what you were told.
Yes, so to point out, it was the GBC Stadium at the time, and it was on Highland Avenue over there on the west side.
Beautiful Highland Avenue.
Which became Lombardi Avenue. Right, so you've got a name change there. And the stadium has more than doubled in size. We've had changes. It's maintained that footprint. And there's been rumors of what they can do with the team or with the stadium and things like that over the years. Looking ahead, so where the group of people that I tailgate with, we tailgate in lot 1. And to get into lot 1, you not only have to be a season ticket holder, but then you have to buy a pass that gets you into lot 1 for the games as well, in addition to your season tickets. And the folks who are the pass holders for lot 1 have been told there's a possibility that lot 1 will not be available coming up this season.
What
and
does
there
that
are
mean?
rumors going around of what that could be. And the one thing they alluded to was creating underground parking for the players, which to me doesn't make sense. Why you would dig and try to create underground parking. Maybe covered parking would be something, but I don't know how big of a footprint that they would need in that whole lot to do underground parking or some type of covered parking for the players. So that rumor evolved to something that really becomes my unpopular opinion. And my unpopular opinion is that it is time to put a roof on Lambeau Field.
There's no fucking way.
The question, I told you, it's an unpopular opinion.
It's a wrong opinion. No, it's not unpopular. It's wrong.
It's
But
fundamentally wrong.
There are rumors out there that they're going to use that entire parking lot to build some gigantic structure that will be a cover that can then be moved over the stadium for inclement weather. And you look at the picture that Neil
John,
has
what conspiracy groups do you hang out in?
That's no.
Could you put something over it that might keep out rain or keep out snow? Maybe, but you're not going to keep out the cold or anything like that. Yeah, creating a retractable roof of some type would be a monstrous eyesore.
John, the best part about the best part about that San Francisco game, other than their opening drive, is what's actually indicated in the picture. The snow in the second half was absolutely gorgeous.
There's no
my
way
favorite game at Lambeau is the Seattle game in 2007 with the snowball game. I mean, there's nothing like snow in Lambeau, and I can't even conceive of doing something other than that. So yeah, go back to your Joe Rogan groups and get the hell off the podcast with this.
Whatever the plan is, there's a possibility that we will not be tailgating in lot 1 coming up in the 2022 season. We don't know yet what the plan is, whether they're going to use that space to, whatever the stock sale went towards, if they're fixing up those scoreboards, if they're putting in more up top. We don't know what the future holds.
Or just for player salaries. I mean, do you know, actually, serious question, do you know how much was raised from that latest stock sale?
I thought the number was their goal was, I want to say, only like $90 million.
It's like 64 million that 64 million they've raised, but they're actually explicitly forbidden to use that for player salaries or anything along those lines. They've got to use it for infrastructure.
Yeah, it has to be infrastructure and renovations.
Okay.
So the point of Jeff's story with the Packer history is, here's a stadium that evolved from Old City Stadium on the east side to New City Stadium on the west side. They had this beautiful footprint on the hillside there to create the bowl, a stadium that started out with 32,000 people, that is more than double in size, that has been able to just grow it. It's one of the longest continuous use stadiums in the country for any sport. And just trying to figure out, Is something gonna change? Yes. Is it gonna be radical? No. Is it still gonna work? Probably, but we just don't know what the future holds. And I told you guys, you could, I put myself out there with an unpopular opinion. Did you guys come up with one at all, or are you gonna wait for another time for that?
My unpopular opinion is that the U.S. men's national team played Honduras tonight in Minneapolis at below zero temperatures. And they did this for the most chicken shit of all reasons, that they wanted to make Honduras uncomfortable. Honduras is a team that we should easily beat, and we deserve to be punished. And so, it looks like we won tonight, but I'm kind of hoping the end of the World Cup qualifying makes us a little bit tight as far as I want us to qualify for the World Cup, but I want us to lose something that we shouldn't lose. So we really have have it a little bit squeaky by the time we get to the final game. I don't want us to ease in because of this dumbassery of playing in Minneapolis in February.
When
Yeah,
the ambient temperature is zero.
Yeah, nobody wants to play anything in Minneapolis in January anyway, right, Jeff?
Outside.
Outside.
So at this point, I will defer my unpopular opinion at this point. But we've got lots to talk about next week. There is a game coming up. Looking forward to it. So we'll get an opportunity to make our picks next week. Gather some more intelligence on the two teams potentially. We'll see if there's any more changes within the league coming up over the next couple weeks. Tom Brady now apparently is officially.
I thought we were going to go this podcast without mentioning that bastard. Jeez, we don't need to mention everything. We can ignore things that are points of pain.
Leave it to Jeff to drop that one in.
So we've got both Ben Roethlisberger and Brady retiring. So you've got two.
John, do we have somebody lined up to replace Jeff in the podcast?
Easy.
I got 3 kids. I don't know. We can throw one of the girls on.
We'll see what happens. Like I said, so join us next week. We we'll make our picks. We'll come up with some other goofy shit, hopefully. And we may even, have a guest or two on. Who knows?
Neil, any parting shots from you?
I've already said what I have to say about the U.S. men's national team. Let's make them suffer.
Football.
All right, sounds good. Hey, everybody, get more information on the GBC podcast at Green Bay Chat on Twitter and on Facebook at the GBC podcast Green Bay Chat. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel, get those updates as we post the shows as they come about every week. And may you fully appreciate the magnitude of your impending good fortune. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Night.